Hi, everybody. I thought it'd be only fair if I went ahead and gave you a synopsis of my own philosophy of education. Since all of our mentors did, I thought it'd be something I could do. So, real quickly, um, what my overall philosophy is that I honestly believe we need to hold our students to high standards. We have to be really, really clear in our instructions to them and what our expectations for them are, and we have to scaffold that so that they can meet those objectives coming into the classroom with the skills that they have and the knowledge that they have, the base knowledge that they have. So that's what I think we need to do as educators. What's the goal of education? The goal of education is to produce a citizen that's going to leave our high school and be able to do what he or she chooses to do, whether that's go into the military or go into the job force immediately out of high school or go on to higher education. Those are the things that we need to be teaching our students to do, those life skills that are important. So, in that respect, as a scientist, I'm going to teach my students to be able to read data, to read, especially, you know how important this is in COVID now, to read things like scientific studies and make sense of them and know what the pros and cons are, the risk factors. All of that is things that my students need to be able to do when they leave the classroom. They need to be uh, educated citizens. And that's really what I want them to be able to be able to do mathematics so that they can understand their taxes, the loans that they take out. They can read studies about the hazards of driving fast or any other sorts of things that students need to be able to read and process to make decisions. That's what I think education needs to be used for. My philosophical framework, okay, that's it's a little academic, I think, this part of the rubric. And if I had to pigeonhole myself, it would be somewhere along the lines of progressive, like John Dewey, where we're trying to get our students to interact with the material and to try to make sense of it from their own perspective. But at the same time, I'm a science teacher. If I'm teaching chemistry, they need to know chemistry. They need to know what a proton is and what a neutron is and what an electron is. They need to know how acids and bases interact. That's essential knowledge. And because that's essential knowledge, that would put me, in that essentialism category. I do believe there's certain things that students need to be able to do when they leave my classroom. Mathematics. I mean, it's they need to be able to use a calculator. They need to be able to deal with large and small numbers. They need to be able to do basic math in their heads. Those are the sorts of things that I think students need to be able to do when they leave the classroom. Again, this is my philosophy of education. In terms of assessment, I've always believed that as a teacher, you need to be roaming the room. If it's not literally, it's with your eyes, finding out if the students are getting what you're talking about. That's formative assessment. I've When I'm in the classroom, I generally have a pulse of whether students are paying attention, who's paying attention, who's not, who's lost, who's got it, who needs a little extra help. That's what it means for formative assessment. And I'm trying to do that all the time, whether it's literally walking around the students' desks or watching their eyes and seeing if they understand or asking them questions for clarity. Those are the sorts of things that I do all the time. In terms of formative assessment, I'm always going to give them some work to let them practice what they learned in the classroom, and I'm also going to give them hands-on labs. And if I can't find a hands-on lab, it'll be a virtual lab, so that at least they get the concept of what it is when these two substances mix together, or what happens when you light this on fire, whether that's a chemical change or a physical change, all of that sort of stuff. And then in terms of assessment, final assessments or summative assessments, I'm going to give them a test. It's going to be a pencil and paper test. It could be a performance test. For instance, if it was a lab activity, I might ask them to measure out exactly 10 milliliters of a liquid or something like that. That's an assessment that I would often do. I also allow retakes to a certain extent. If a student does really poorly on a test, I allow them to retake the test. But that retake can be no higher than 70%. I know it sounds kind of funny, but what that means then is if you had a really bad day, didn't, your kid brother was up all night sick or something like that and you weren't able to sleep, heck, we all have bad days, right? Students can have bad days too. So give them a chance to make it up, but at 70%, meaning that in essence they failed to prepare for that test. Okay, sometimes some of it was outside of their purview, but at the same time, if they were learning the material, if they were up on step the whole chapter, you don't need to really study or cram for a chapter test if you've been paying attention. So that's what that retake is all about. You can keep your grade relatively high. You can keep it in the C range, but you do kind of pay a penalty for not being prepared when the test rolls around. Late work, things like that, I allow late work to come in because I want my students to know that I care more about the quality of their work than exactly being on time. If you turn in a crap paper for me that's on time, I would rather it be a couple days late and be a really good doubly edited, triply edited paper that's been read by 2 or 3 of your peers or someone you trust, and then you turn it into me. That is the threshold of quality that I want. Yeah, timeliness is important, but it's not everything. Now, some of the other things are a little definitely different from teacher to teacher. But what it is, when we teach in a sociocultural context, it is not about the dressing. It is not about thinking of ideas that people can say that their family does, or cultural practices that their family does, and things like that. It's really not about that. It's really about accepting who you are in the classroom and accepting where they are coming from and working to meet them in that connection. And that's really what I think I have always tried to do. I've tried to meet my students as individuals, not as a racial class or anything like that. I'm looking at those students as people, individuals that I'm trying to expect the very best of them, expect the most of them, and work with them on that level. I'm not going to dumb down a curriculum because you're a particular race or a culture. I'm going to ask everybody to rise to the highest level possible. So I'm going to have a variety of activities too, so that all of you are going to see this information and interact with it with your senses in different ways. The more times that I can talk about a particular thing, the more ways that I can ask you to smell it or see it or taste it or speak it, the better you're going to understand it. It's not about learning styles. That's hogwash. There's no such thing. But is there a means of making stuff sticky in the brain? Yes. Getting to think about it, to connect the dots with all of those different ways that we take information into our noggin. And that's what I'm asking you to do as teachers, and that's what I've always asked my students to do, to try to connect that, to try to, as I've told all of you, to make it from their working memory into their long-term memory. If you can get that information into long-term memory, that's what learning is. And that's my purpose or my philosophy of education.